My name is Jeff. Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Young. I'm the Director for Urban Extension at the University of Kentucky, and welcome to the National Urban Extension Leaders Professional Development Action Team webinar. And we are so happy that you decided to join us today. As you may know, Newell is a collaborative network of over 1,000 professionals, extension professionals working across the country to make a difference in their larger urban communities. And this is the first of 4 webinars addressing Newell's 4 focus areas known as the 4 Ps: positioning, programs, personnel, and partnerships. And each of these focus areas will be discussed by expert presenters from across the country. If you have questions during the webinar, please write those down. There will be a question and answer period at the end. And so with that, let me introduce to you Catherine Williams. Catherine is the County Extension Director in Wake County, North Carolina, encompassing the capital city, Raleigh, and home of the North Carolina State University. Wake County is North Carolina's most populous county with over 1.1 million residents. And Catherine is a former 4-H agent and provides leadership to a team of 40 county-based extension professionals, focused largely on community food systems, youth development, agriculture, and water quality initiatives in the second fastest growing county in the country. Catherine has been active with Newell for many years and currently serves as chair of the National Urban Extension Leaders. Catherine, thank you for taking time to be with us today and welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, Jeff, and good afternoon, everyone. I do not see the PowerPoint right now, so we are going to ask for, it was there and it disappeared, but that's good because it gave me a chance to see all of you and to welcome you all. It's good to see both some friends and some new faces. So thank you all for being with us this afternoon. Jeff, if you want to go to the next slide. I have a couple of different tasks on the call this afternoon. The first of which is just to give some background and context to the current movement of urban extension. So Jeff, if you go to the next slide, I'm going to give that a start. So first of all, I just want to set the stage by acknowledging that this is not the first time that across our system professionals have come together to try and ignite a movement around urban. And of course, that has been re-energized by an acknowledgement that over 80% of the current US population does live in what has been defined as urban areas in our country. And we acknowledge some common themes across those urban communities. The first one being just the complexity that sometimes comes with having such a high population density. Jeff, if you click, these will show up. Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot I had one of these slides in there. But the second one being, as you all know, all too well, demographics and the various diversity that we enjoy in our urban communities. And then thirdly, a theme that really resonates with us in urban extension tends to be the urban, suburban, and rural interdependencies. So things like food, water, that are, and air, of course, that are really important and that are not just something that is controlled within any kind of an urban or a boundary that we might create. Next slide, please. So this really energized a number of urban professionals across the country to come together and look at how we could work collectively across our system, how we could try to be more strategic in building capacity to support urban professionals across the system, and really be more impactful with the work that we're doing in those communities. It was a grassroots-led movement from urban professionals. And we fudge a little bit with this picture because some of you who've been around a while know that I think that picture's from St. Louis. But the first time that the professionals actually reconvened or convened initially was at the Galaxy Conference in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I'd like to give due to where our founding roots are. So next slide, please. So we worked for about a year and a half, really, as a grassroots-led initiative, and we got some traction. And one of the ways that we did that was by working together to put together what we now refer to as the National Urban Extension Framework. Is actually a document that is available to all of you. It was adopted by ECOP, which is the Extension Committee on Policy, in 2015. And in that original framework document, we outlined our assessment of national trends that impacted extension in urban areas. We did a strategic analysis of the opportunities for urban extension. We also established a national representative structure representing all the regions across the country in the extension system and established what our governance and leadership structure would look like. Next slide. The original framework outlined 4 elements of successful programming, successful models in urban areas. I'm not going to talk a lot about those because we have a whole section devoted to that, but those 4 initial areas are positioning, programs, personnel, and partnerships, referred to as the 4 Ps. Next. The framework also outlined 5 areas of focus that largely align with program areas across the extension system, strengthening our communities, protecting the environment, improving our health, enriching youth, and feeding our future. These are the 5 focus areas that we refer to in Newell. Next slide. The leadership structure that I spoke to earlier, in a nutshell, that involves a 17-member steering committee. There are where all 5 of the ECOP regions are represented by 3 elected or appointed members from each of the region, and also a liaison from ECOP and a liaison from NIFA. So that those individuals make up the 17-member steering committee. We also have action teams that are a regular part of our infrastructure and support for the National Urban Extension leaders. And of course, this webinar series is being hosted by the Professional Development and Training Action Team for Newell. But there are several other action teams which also meet regularly, including JEDI, which is Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Team, a Communications Action Team, and also the National Urban Extension Conference Planning Team. We do our work and largely mobilize across the country through regional networks. So within each of the ECOP regions, there is an individual who has been appointed to serve as the regional network chair for each of those regions. And there are also urban coordinators who have been identified at each state level. So ideally, we have the regional network chair communicating regularly with urban coordinators and pulling together leadership and on a regional level. so that projects can be created across states, or regions of the country can come together to talk about opportunities, strategic opportunities for advancing work in their region specifically. And we are guided by a set of operational principles, we like to call them, instead of bylaws. And we are considered the group providing programmatic leadership across the system to ECOP. Next slide, please. So the purpose and sort of the role that we've kind of settled into around that programmatic leadership across the system is we are really seeking to provide a platform for regional and national collaboration in this space. We help cultivate new ideas and build capacity for those ideas. We offer professional development in many non-traditional content areas across our system, or it may be a content area that is of interest across the system. It may be that we are pulling urban professionals together to look at different ways of addressing particular issues or a particular content area. We share research and programming results across the system. If someone does a pilot project that's promising, we help get that word out, the information out throughout other urban communities who could take advantage of it. And we are working to identify best practice and to describe our collective impact in urban communities. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Martha Aiken, who's going to do this next part for us.
Thanks, Catherine. I'm Martha Aitken. I'm with Washington State University, and I am a last-minute understudy for my colleague, Brad Gerlach, to talk with you a little bit about some urban stakeholders. Catherine just mentioned collaboration, and I have 3 sites to share with you about groups that have been collaborating with Newell in these efforts. The first one is the National Urban Research and Extension Center. And some of you may know this from our previous iteration, the Western Center for Metropolitan Extension and Research, originally a collaboration of 6 Western extension organizations, which grew to 14 across the country. And now we are positioning ourselves to be a national organization to conduct applied research and help with innovation and issue leadership on a national scale. We have been providing fellowships as one way to innovate urban extension, and some of our fellows are on the meeting right now. Ramona Madison-Hector and Marie Rumenap, and I saw Julie Jessmer, and I think Alyssa Bowers have all participated as fellows for the Western Center. We also bring a group of our external partners to this effort, and one group that we've been participating with or collaborating with recently is the National League of Cities. So, and I can drop the website for the Western Center in the chat in a bit. Next slide, please, Jeff. Our next slide is about is a JCEP organization, and Jeff, if you're able to move that forward, perfect. Thank you so much. Epsilon Sigma Phi is a JCEP organization open to people from, or extension professionals of all disciplines. And the group that I'm involved with is called the Urban and Culturally Diverse Audiences Affinity Group, much like a committee, but technically an affinity group. And it's a space where people serving urban communities and diverse audiences can connect. We have monthly meetings and also quarterly live discussions that are open to all extension professionals. I have a note here. Our next one is just next week. It's February 13th. And the guest speaker will be Dr. Diana Carminati from Park University in Missouri. She's going to be talking about criminal justice, and I will pop the information about registration for that conversation in the chat after I'm done, so you could register for that. Next slide, please, Jeff. And the last one is also a JCEP organization, NAE4HYDP. For over 10 years now, they've had an urban programming working group that is open to all urban practitioners. And they do meet quarterly, and their current goals are listed here. I'm particularly interested in number 3. I'm not a member of this group, but I'm eager to hear how they measure the impact of 4-H urban programming through their qualitative research study. So hopefully you folks are engaged with some of these organizations, and if not, you can become engaged. Thanks so much. I'm passing it on to my next speaker.
That is coming back to me to talk a little bit about future direction. So next slide, please, Jeff. So Martha has given a little bit of an overview of at least 3 of the organizations that we have listed up here in this visual. The 4th one being the Extension Foundation. They are another critical partner in our promoting urban extension. And what we are working now in and across the system with our National Urban Extension Leaders Group is to try and expand our engagement with additional, we want all the rock stars in the system. We want all the voices and leverage all the good ideas and expertise. So we are working to do that, and we're working collaboratively to try and align so that we have a shared agenda across all of these groups that really represent the best of what our system thinking is right now. So we are working on an update to that National Urban Extension Framework that I outlined in the beginning of the webinar, to look at what does urban extension look like 10 years later. In that effort, we are working to refine our model to lay out what best practice in urban extension really is, to increase supports to states who are trying to advance and progress in urban areas. We want to focus on collecting impact data across the system. And we've established these work groups right now that are working with members from all of the different groups mentioned on the left to look at how we're going to come together and articulate our agenda and our priorities related to each of those things. Yeah, you can go ahead to the next slide, Jeff. One other action team that I wanted to give mention to, and I know several of you are on this call, along with our next speaker will be Marie Rumenap from Michigan, who is the past chair of NUEL and is giving some focus to our best practice and priority impact action team, really looking at researching urban models, developing the National Urban Impact Dashboard, and working to identify and promote best practice. Next slide. Since we're talking a little bit about best practice, I will share these with you. This is a we have coalesced some of what we believe to be best practices in urban space. Right now, I think as you all are reading through these, and if I read through every single one of them, I believe that people on this call who are working urban professionals would say, yes, I resonate with those things. So these are all practices that we have identified and are working to do additional research on and talk about how we might advance some of this work across the system. And next slide, please. To do that, We are going to hear now from Marie, and I think Jeff has probably got a little bit of a bio to share with you on Marie Rumenap, our next speaker.
I do. Thank you, Catherine. I appreciate that information. We're now transitioned to Dr. Marie Rumenap with Michigan State University. Dr. Rumenap is an extension outreach specialist at Michigan State in the School of Planning, Design, and Construction. So that's a little bit different than maybe what some of us might be used to. And she spent 32 years in various extension positions before moving to her current role, where her focus is urban extension, community, civic engagement, and individual and family sustainable living. So welcome, Marie. We look forward to hearing from you.
Great. Thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Catherine, for passing it on. So you guys, I'm going to talk a little bit about the 4P framework, or its official name, the National Urban Extension Framework. This is a framework that was put together in 2015, and you heard Catherine say it hits 4 areas that we identified that are critical to really good, successful extension work in urban spaces. And they are positioning, programs, personnel, and partnership. And in 2015, when Newell originally put this framework out there as one that extension should be looking at and working towards, we gave a lot of examples of things that were, successful or good positioning of extension, or successful programs, same with personnel and partnerships. But in the last 10 years, there's a number of us that have been working on this, but we collectively, I would say as a group, have had several people individually do more extensive literature reviews. And there's actually been some additional research or studies that have been done to actually begin to not only identify what good personnel practices look like, but begin to actually describe those and have words to really define the characteristics of those. So Jeff, if we could go to the next slide. So we are currently in the process of updating the framework in terms of really the language, not the areas. The literature and the research over the last 10 years around, what needs to be done in urban areas for extension to be successful in delivering programs or positioning themselves or hiring employees in urban communities. Those things have stayed the same in terms of the larger categories over the last 10 years. But now we've been able to really identify and describe these a little bit better. And so you'll see here, there are 4 main areas under positioning that we've identified. And the first is organizational understanding and adaptation, supporting urban work. And this is really understanding, having the extension system you work for understand the urban context in which you're working. And then the adaptation of extension's culture and history, which, as all of you know, has been very rural, very agriculturally focused, to a more urban, being open to more urban. And then there are a number of things around extension leadership or administration, policies and procedures and funding and other central operations that we've learned really need to be tweaked oftentimes again to support urban work. And then building capacity and engaging urban audiences is definitely an area. And then effective marketing of extension in urban spaces, where there's actually a plan to reach a broad and diverse urban audience, and where there is a relevant image for extension within that urban space, and it's branded that way, as well as using effective language and modes to communicate to urban audiences. Jeff, if we could go to the next slide. In the programs area, again, we've been able to really not just provide examples, but really label them, and they fall within the program content area, and then, of course, the program delivery area. You'll see under program content, really looking at program content developed specifically for urban audiences. also looking at content that has been effectively adapted for urban audiences, and then being able to really access the land-grant university expertise around relevant content for urban audiences. And then in terms of delivery modes, again, reaching out to urban audiences in a way that is effective to reaching them, and adapting methods that we're using currently or have used historically to be able to reach urban audiences, and then engaging technology or other contemporary delivery modes to reach large numbers of urban residents. And then Jeff, next slide, please. In the areas of personnel, we have hiring and retention, and really looking at those to be able to hire expertise for urban and then retain that staff. Also looking at adaptations in staffing patterns. And I think I kind of hit on this a little bit, but looking at the staff competencies that are needed to be effective in urban so that they're urban focused. And then professional development that supports those things and expands upon those competencies. And then lastly, in the area of personnel, thinking about volunteers and recruiting and roles and training that are relevant for urban spaces. And then in our last area around partnerships, really looking at the partnership development, both internally, externally, and governmental partners, so that it's relevant to urban spaces. And then using effective engagement models for urban spaces. Lots of partners, lots of different groups, lots of expertise. So partnership models need to be adapted to those spaces. So Jeff, if we could go to maybe our next slide. And Catherine started to jump into this a little bit. The group that's been working on impacts for urban extension and looking at the research and literature around sort of the urban model has also expanded upon what they have seen in these reviews around characteristics for best practices in urban, because the next thing the group wants to do is to begin to collect success stories and models and in these areas that have been identified to share. And so we started out with what makes something a best practice for extension. And we said it needs to have urban relevancy, and you'll see a whole list of things that really kind of expand upon what was shared earlier. It's, history of success, proven effectiveness in urban space, not the rural space, but it's got to be effective in the urban. Delivery modes that are applicable to urban, evidence of demonstrated need or response to a needs assessment. The next big area is it needs to have measurable outcomes or impacts. And so it has to have goals and objectives that match and define the outcomes and impacts, and applicable and adaptable across many cities. So it's flexible, and it has a defined or a recognized set of steps that could be replicated, looked at and replicated in other places, and evidence of consistency across the examples or locations that it might be being done in, whatever the practice is, whether it's a program or it's hiring or it's the way that extension is funded. So it could cross any of the areas within the 4P model, and then it needs to be sustainable. And then lastly, also looking in best practice for that partnership or collaboration and evidence of inclusion and cultural sensitivity for the urban space, and evidence of community involvement and engagement that's effective, and then effective communication and terms that are used in communication, marketing, et cetera, that are relevant and resonate with urban audiences. So the group has just really started to hone in on this more specific list. Like I said, the next plan is to begin to collect examples of best practices that then can be shared, and then also begin to collect impacts from our urban work across the system, so that those can be collated in an electronic format that can be searchable and accessible to tell the story of what's happening in urban spaces, tell really about the work that probably all, or at least most of you, are doing in your jobs every day. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up, and Jeff, turn it back to you to, or whoever the next speaker is, to talk about how to get involved in the National Urban Extension Leaders.
Great. Thank you so much, Marie. Next on the agenda is Anthony Tuggle, and Anthony is the County Extension Director in Rutherford County, Tennessee, and has been involved with the Newell since its inception. He's currently the chair of the National Urban Extension Conference. And Anthony, we're grateful you have had able to carve out some time to be with us today.
Thanks, Jeff, and welcome everyone. All from everyone you've heard so far today, you asked how to get involved. That's how you can get involved. Everything we've listed so far is where we need bodies and people to get involved. But I'm going to kind of elaborate on a few other things. Catherine had mentioned earlier about getting involved by action team. So if those action teams interest you, I'm going to call them out again. JEDI, which is Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Professional Development, which is one who's hosting this one today, as well as Newark National Urban Extension Conference, and as well as two other ones that's coming on board. One is Best Practice that Marie talked a little bit about, and also we're talking another one about, I'm going to call it mentoring just for the part. So many of those action teams, we need people to be involved in those, people to assess, hear from people like yourself, urban extension professionals, to be engaged in some of those. And as Catherine also mentioned about state coordinators, we have a list of state coordinators. You maybe have a more of an interest in providing and reaching out to people in your state. So you're interested in doing that, please reach out to me. We'll get to all the contact information later. So we want to kind of update our contact list for state coordinators. So if you're interested in that role or know your state coordinator, don't know who that person is in your state, will be a good way for you to be involved. Catherine also talked about the 17-member steering committee that we have. You may not be a steering committee member, but our meetings are open to anyone who's interested in doing urban work. So if you're participating in those meetings, you're welcome. I'm not the chair, Catherine, so I'm speaking out. So Catherine's the chair, so I'm inviting everyone to participate as well. Because we do hear from a lot of people, especially in our face-to-face meeting. We try to meet twice a year, and those typically in May and December. So you want to get involved and get engaged, because we continue to hear from probably about 25 professionals on a regular basis at those meetings and getting the same opinion. So more opinion we have, more people we have on our bench, the more work we can do in urban spaces. We also, Catherine mentioned, and I think Marie mentioned as well, about the National Urban Extension Conference. I'm going to touch on that a little bit more later, but that's one way we host that conference every 2 years. So we need people to be involved in that for planning, executing those, reading the abstract, applying for awards, reading those award packages, and a lot of those things as well. But not only that, in the off year of the National Urban Extension Conference, each of the 5 regions host regional meetings or regional conferences. So just like the national conference, we need people to be involved in planning and executing that, not only executing, but presenting at those regional and national meetings. Because most regions hold a quarterly meeting. So you might want to present some things that you're doing in your state or your county from your region, but not only that, you can participate in other regions' meetings as well. So we need participants to participate in those quarterly meetings. And also, Jeff had one on the page right now is Connect Extension. Join Connect Extension. That's one way we try to connect as a organization across the country. You can put in posts, you can put in events and activities and things that way, so you can actually be engaged in those blogs or whatever the case may be that you want to get involved with in connecting with Connect Extension and other stitching professionals. And Catherine mentioned earlier, I think Marie talked about the best practice. So we're going to individual to help push those best practices out and try to gather information on that. One that I'm working on, I'm calling it the mentoring one right now. We're starting up, will be developing a mentoring program for early career professionals. Some of you all may be mentors, may have ideas on how we can implement and get those started. Not only that, developing a toolkit for evaluation, core competencies, job description for urban professionals, business plans, whatever the case may be. So we're going to be looking at doing a lot of those activities, and we need people to help us, because right now the bench is small. We want to grow the bench and get more people involved in the in urban extension. Some other things that, a couple other things I'm going to mention real quick is there are several different ECOP program committee. One come to mind, Urban Ag, and Jeff is working on food system and things of that. So those program committees that we kind of connected with ECOP would be some ways get people involved with urban extension. And I'm going to circle back to the National Urban Extension Conference that will be in May of this year. So you haven't registered. You want to go ahead and register and start participating, getting involved in that. And one thing to get involved for the conferences, basically we're going to have regional, I'm gonna say regional hospitality nights, where the regional, from each region will kind of be their host, and you can bring things, talk about your region or your state. So that'll be one way you can get involved at the national conference that we'll be hosting in Nashville. And there's information out there. Thank you all.
Thank you, Anthony. And I think you touched on it, but just to review, connecting with Newell through Connect Extension is another good way that you can keep up to date with the latest happenings, conferences, news, special events. And so I'm sure many of you are already connected because you're here. And that's this is one of the main ways that we pushed information out about today's webinar. If you're not a member or not connected through Connect Extension yet, it's really simple to join. You just have to create, a user ID and select a password and that sort of thing. And then once you get into the system, you'll have a choice of picking many different subgroups. And here are two examples. There's the overall Newell subgroup, which you can see has over 1,000 members. And then the one that I work with, the Urban Ag and Food System subgroup, has like 400. And there's several other urban focused groups there for you to take a look at. And now to talk about next steps, I want to introduce Ramona Madhosing Hector. Ramona is the Regional Specialized Agent in Urban Sustainability at the University of Florida IFAS Extension and serves the Southwest District. Since 2010, she has developed educational programs that support and advance the region's commitment to sustainability, including programs focused on resource efficiency, community sustainability, and food systems. Ramona has MSP in Urban and Regional Planning from Florida State University, a Master of Science degree in Environmental Science from Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University, and a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture from the University of the West Indies, Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome, Ramona.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks so much for giving me the chance to stand in for Brenda Rogers today, who has been serving as the chair of the Newell Professional Action Team. So when we think about next steps, Jeff will just move forward just one slide. This is a short segment here as we look at our time clock. So this, as Catherine mentioned, is a webinar series that's being coordinated through the Professional Development Action Team. And our focus this year is on the 4 Ps. So today's session, which is struck out on the flyer, is February the 8th. And we've been talking a little bit about positioning. Our next intention is to have a webinar or to host a partnerships panel at the National Urban Extension Conference. So we typically meet on Thursdays. So you'll see on the webinar flyer that we're planning to host our next session on May 30th, 2024, which will be in Nashville, Tennessee, and that will be the partnerships panel. We have a panel coming up on August and then November. So again, if you are connected through Connect Extension, you'll see the blog posts going out. You'll see the reminders being sent out from those of us here at the Professional Development Action Team to tell you what topics are coming up next and what dates and times. And for those of you who didn't realize today, there is a Zoom link built in, so you should be able to access that through the bit.ly link, or again, feel free to email me and I can send you that link. And then lastly, again, just mentioning that the National Urban Extension Conference, as Anthony mentioned, we'll be having a number of panels. So even though we mentioned that we will have a discussion on partnerships as part of the 4P webinar series, there'll be panels at the National Urban Extension Conference that focus on leading edge dialogue, which will be structured again around the 4Ps. So another reason for you to attend the National Urban Extension Conference in person to get more and learn more about the Newell 4P framework. And in addition to the leading edge dialogue panels, we'll have standalone panels. So there's lots of activity around urban frameworks and implementation plans at the National Urban Extension Conference. And that's it for us today. We'll wrap up here and we'll turn it over to Jeff. And we'll take questions in the chat box, which I will share with Jeff.
Very good. Thank you, Ramona. Appreciate that. We do have some time for questions. If you would, put those in the chat box and we will get our panel of experts to address those for you, if at all possible. One question that was posted already is, where would the recording for this webinar be? And so we will store this on our Newell YouTube page, and then so we will put the link to that recording in Connect Extension in our Newell subgroup news blog area. So if you have questions, please type those in now. Again, we want to thank all of our presenters today. We appreciate you taking time to be with us. We know all of you have very busy schedules. Ramona, while we're waiting just a few more minutes, I know that you've been very involved in planning for the National Urban Extension Conference and the workshops. Communications has gone out to workshop presenters last week. Is there anything else that you need help with here coming up in the next month or so?
I don't think so. I think Anthony, who is our conference chair, has already requested that we'll be needing volunteers to help with moderating sessions. So we plan to put a call out for that, and we'll probably use Extension Connect as well, because that's something that's critical to the functioning and execution of a great conference.
Excellent. Thank you. Any final comments from any of our presenters? Marie, Catherine, Martha? All right. Well, if you have to leave, we certainly appreciate your taking time out to be with us today. And some of us will stay around here in case there are any final questions. And please be on the lookout for additional information for our next webinar. And we look forward to seeing you at the National Urban Extension Conference. Thank you so much.